This video is brought to you by Squarespace. From websites and online stores to marketing tools and analytics, Squarespace is the all-in-one platform to build a beautiful online presence and run your business. Among the many tools an artist has at their disposal, few are as powerful as color and mark. And of the many artistic movements, few utilized these tools better than Impressionism, Fauvism, and Abstract Expressionism. And this was not lost on Louise Woodruff. Born in 1882 in the thick of Impressionism, Woodruff started off her career with that movement, yet found her voice in Fauvism, a relatively short-lived movement defined by exuberant colors, wild brushwork, and simple abstraction of form. And yet, by the end of her career, she was a full-on abstract expressionist, exploring color, mark, and movement with aplomb. And this landscape painting of hers, with its thick, buttery, lusciously applied impasto, speaks to Woodruff's understanding and confidence with color and mark. But what makes this painting so attractive is also what makes its conservation difficult. Handling this delicate paint layer is complicated. The canvas has been cropped and tacked through the paint layer. It's absolutely filthy, and the canvas is plagued by planar distortions. And there are a litany of other problems that we don't even know we'll face. Some won't reveal themselves until we're in the thick of it. Finding those complex problems that require creative and inventive solutions is really the best part of my job. It's what makes it so fulfilling and rewarding day in and day out. That said, there are times when I am elbows deep in a project and I wish there was an easier way. And that's when I wish Squarespace had my back. I mean, think about it. All of you out there who are about to embark upon building a website, well, there is no better time. Squarespace has taken all of the heavy lifting off of your plate, from designing beautiful, mobile-friendly templates that work everywhere, to creating a comprehensive platform that allows you to add and customize your website as you see fit. You can add an e-commerce solution to sell tangible and digital goods as well as services online. You can even manage digital content with their suite of tools for content creators. And when you get into the thick of it and need some creative solutions, Squarespace has you covered. With online tutorials, help guides, a robust forum, and good old-fashioned real-life humans to step in when you just want to talk to somebody. So head over to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/Baumgartner to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. So let's jump right in. The first thing that I'm going to do, as with many projects, is remove this painting from the stretcher support. And I'm going to do that with my tack puller by removing these tacks from the tacking edge. But on this painting, because there is paint on this tacking edge, I'm going to be a little bit more careful. I want to make sure that I don't break off or damage any of this impasto. It's really brittle. And so I can remove the tacks from the front when they come out easily, or slide the tool in between the canvas and the stretcher, and use the canvas to help me lift up that tack a little bit so that I don't put any pressure on that paint layer. Some of these tacks are really in there, and if I were to use this tool directly on the paint layer, it inevitably would break off some of that impasto, which I don't want. Once I have all of the tacks removed, I can lift off this painting from the support. Unlike sometimes where I flip the painting over, this one I don't want to put any pressure on this impasto. I'll go really carefully here, making sure not to crease that tacking edge and force any tension or stress on that impasto for fear that it would break off. And now I find a nice surprise. Looking at this stretcher, I can see that it's been signed by the artist in two places, on the top and the bottom. Louise Woodruff. In addition, the multiple tack holes seem to indicate that this stretcher was used multiple times, as artists often do. Paint something, stretch it, see if it sells. If not, pull it off, use the stretcher again, so on and so forth. And that information will inform what I do later on. But for now, I'm going to take the painting over to the hot table and do a treatment to get it flat. There are a lot of distortions in this canvas. I'm spraying down a piece of acid-free cotton blotter paper with some distilled deionized water. I want to dampen it just a little bit, then put the painting on that, create an air evacuation route with some cotton webbing, and then cover the painting with a piece of release film to protect that impasto, and then add an additional layer of acrylic felt that I've cut, again to protect that delicate paint layer. I'm going to unfold the tacking edge that was folded under very carefully, and then put the felt down on top of it. I'll cover the entire thing with another piece of Mylar, I'll tape it down to the table to create an airtight seal, and then I'll put my through bag connectors through the Mylar, which will allow me to evacuate the air with the vacuum pump. And then I'll turn on the vacuum pump and the heat. I'll set the heat to the desired temperature and then allow the table to slowly come up to temperature. This is going to take about 10 or 15 minutes, depending on the heat I want. Once the table has been heated, I can remove all of the air with the vacuum pump. And you can see here how the pressure conforms to the impasto. I'm going to lower the pressure down to really a relatively low amount because I don't want to put any undue stress on this delicate paint layer. Sometimes I use a lot of pressure, and sometimes, like in this case, I just need a little bit. Once the table has cooled after I've turned off the heat, I can turn off the vacuum pump and I can remove the painting from this little envelope. And you can see as I remove this felt, the release film has conformed to the texture of the painting, and none of that impasto has been damaged. That's the whole point of using the release film, to allow the felt to conform to the impasto, but to prevent the felt from sticking to that impasto. If that release film wasn't there, the felt would effectively get stuck on all the texture. I'll transfer the painting over to a new dry blotter paper, and then I'll put the felt directly on the painting this time. Because there's no moisture and no heat, and the pressure is just gravity and the weights that I'm going to put on it, I want this felt and the additional layers of felt to really conform to this impasto to make sure that there's no deformation as the residual moisture evaporates from this painting and it acclimatizes to my studio. After a few days, I can come back and remove this painting from the weights and remove all of these layers of felt. Here are a couple of wool felt layers, and then finally the acrylic. And you can see the impasto is not damaged and none of it is sticking to the acrylic, precisely what I wanted. All of the little peaks of the impasto are still there, and all of the deformations in the canvas have been removed. So this was a very successful treatment on the hot table. But now I bring the painting over to the front of the studio where I can start thinking about the next set of treatments. And this begins with thinking about the cleaning process. Because this painting has so much impasto, I'm going to take a slightly different approach than normal. Normally, where I would roll a little swab on a stick and use solvent or gel cleaner or one of the other solutions, here I'm going to be using brushes. And it all starts with a gelled solvent. Taking an old brush that is kind of no longer really good for painting, but perfect for scrubbing, I will apply this gel to the paint surface and let it sit for a few minutes. And then I'll start agitating it with this brush. Now this is a synthetic brush with a relatively soft bristle. I don't need anything like a nylon bristle or a wire brush here. I just need a little bit of agitation to get into some of that impasto. And you can see as I start making little swirls, the gel starts to turn gray, indicating that I'm removing that grime. Once I've completed the agitation process, I can take a cotton swab and start making little circles and rolling up over that impasto and picking up all of that gel. And you can see the transformation is pretty shocking. It's wonderful to see, and I expected this. I made some tests early on when I received the painting, but still, this brings a smile to my face. And as I go ahead to clean the rest of the painting, following this routine of applying the gel, agitating it with the brush, and then using a cotton ball to remove the gel with all of the grime in it, we can start to see what this painting should look like. It was pretty clear that it was always going to be a bright painting, full of color. She did not shy away from using color in the same way that she didn't shy away from using paint. But to see it come alive is really spectacular. That cleaning process took nearly 3 hours, but I'm not done. There is still residue trapped in this impasto. And so now I'm taking a neutral organic soap that I mix in the studio, and I'm painting it onto the surface of the painting. This is pH neutral and very mild, and I've tested it against the painting so I can work in a larger area. I've taken another brush, this time a bristle brush that I've cut down, so it's a little bit more abrasive. And I'm going through and really just working all of these areas of impasto, trying to get all of that residue that was stuck in those little nooks and crannies out. It's not enough to clean the painting 90%. I have to clean it completely. This is something that I come across a lot, where old paintings were cleaned, but not fully. Then they were revarnished, and then that combination of old grime and new varnish makes it even more difficult for the next conservator, usually me, to clean the painting properly. And that's not what I want to do. So I'll work just as I did before in smaller areas, apply the neutral organic soap, agitate it with the bristle brush, and then remove it with a dampened cotton ball. This is a water-based soap, so I can use a little bit of water on the cotton ball to help me pick up the residue. Now, this may not be the final pass. In some areas, I may need to make a third or fourth pass to get into all of those little nooks and crannies. Impasto is a wonderful thing. All painters should experiment with it. But it is difficult for conservators. It's fragile, and it holds on to dirt, grime, and old varnish really, really well in a way that flat paintings don't. And so it takes multiple passes sometimes to remove all of that grime or old varnish. With all of that grime and old varnish finally removed, I can start focusing on the structural work that this painting needs. I have decided to strip line this painting because the tacking edges are thin and I don't trust that they're going to hold when I stretch the painting. And I don't want to do all of this work just to have a tacking edge tear or be compromised. But here I'm going to work a little differently. Because there is so much impasto, I don't want to flip the painting over like I normally would with a smooth painting. I don't want to damage any of that surface. And yes, I could put felt down, but that would make putting the iron and weights on the painting complicated. So I'm going to flip it, and I'm going to keep it face up and do it reversed. And I have a little silicone heating pad here, and I'm going to slide this underneath the painting and the adhesive film that I've put down on the tacking edge. I'm going to bring it up to temperature, let it sit, and once it's up to temperature, I'll check it with an infrared thermometer. I'll put a piece of silicone release film and some felt down, and I'll just press it with my hands. The heat will cause the adhesive film to melt and bond to the canvas layer, just like an iron would. It doesn't require a ton of pressure or a ton of time. And once I remove the felt and the silicone release film, we can see that the adhesive film is now bonded to that canvas. And now I can slide it over and do it again. And again. And again. And you betcha, again. It's much slower than using the iron, but this is the right way to do it. Once I've gotten the entire edge bonded down, I can peel off the backing from the adhesive film, and then I can slide underneath this edge the Belgian linen that I have frayed to prevent a hard, crisp edge from transferring to the painting and prepare for bonding it. I'm going to align the strip lining canvas with the edge of the adhesive, and then I'm going to slide that silicone heating blanket underneath. I'm going to put a layer of Mylar release film on top, and then, just like before, a couple of layers of felt and pressure. Again, it doesn't take a lot of pressure and it doesn't take a lot of time for the heat to transfer into the strip lining canvas and into the adhesive film and bond them together. And once I'm done, you can see that this canvas really is bonded fairly well, and that's a good strip lining. This approach is nothing terribly complicated, but it's one that I wouldn't have been able to predict from the future. It's not until one gets in the thick of things that sometimes the problems manifest themselves or the solutions become clear. And that flexibility and creativity, being able to see challenges as opportunities, well, that's really critical to any job, whether it's craft or not. And that, my friends, is a strong strip lining. While this painting was largely free of massive losses, there were some areas that over time the paint flaked off the surface. And before I can do the retouching, I need to find them. So holding the painting up to the light allows me to see where those gaps are and then fill them in with a chalk-based fill medium. I'll use little palette knives to apply the fill-in medium, and where I can, I'll sculpt it with the palette knife. Sometimes it's relatively straightforward, and I'm not terribly concerned about putting too much on right now. I can always remove it later. I just want to make sure that there's enough. So I'll make a first pass over the entire painting, trying to find all of those little areas, checking it against the light to make sure that I don't miss anything. And I'll take care to try to sculpt this as best I can on the first pass with the impasto. I want to see if I can get this 90% complete. I'll use dental tools, brushes, whatever I have, whatever I need to create that texture. Once all of that fill-in is dry, I can come back with some little swabs, dampened, and I can remove the excess fill-in that I applied in the first step. I have to be careful here not to smooth over the entire area that I just created texture in, but if that happens, that's okay. I can come back with a dental tool and I can remove some of the fill-in, or I can resculpt the area that got smoothed over. Remember, this is water-based, so it softens up and reacts to water. And if I don't like it, I can always remove it. But one thing that I want to do is make sure that I'm only leaving fill-in where there was missing paint. I don't want to cover up any of the original. That would be inappropriate, and it would cause me to have to retouch over that, thus covering up the artist's original work. Now, I spent a lot of time thinking about how I wanted to stretch this painting. And because it's signed by the artist on the inside or back, and because there are no markings on the outside, no pencil inscriptions, no labels, I've decided to flip it and use the back as the front and the front as the back. Now, generally, I don't recommend this because most stretchers are designed to be used one way, but this is a universal stretcher, so it has a lip on both sides, which prevents the canvas from hitting the stretcher bar, creating a mark. So, in this case, we have the best of both worlds. We get to keep the original support while revealing the artist's signature, and there's no downside. Like with all the paintings I stretch, I start in the middle, applying a few tacks, and then I'll use my pulling pliers here to apply tension to the canvas. Because this canvas doesn't have an interleaf, it does need tension. Now, I don't need it to be as tight as a drum, but I want to take up as much of the slack as I can during the stretching process. Yes, I can use the keys later on to remove that last 1 or 2% of slack, but I don't like to make a habit of using the keys to add all of the tension. Now, that one tacking edge where the paint and impasto went over it is a problem. I don't want to drive new tacks into it and cause damage to that paint layer. We've decided to keep the painting its original size because we think that that's what the artist did. After looking at the stretcher and the painting, it seemed like it wasn't cut down, and that the artist likely painted it, probably tacked up on a wall, and then stretched it after it was complete. Very common for artists. So we don't want to enlarge the painting, but we also don't want to damage any of that paint. So I've created a really thick pad using a bunch of felt and, again, a non-stick release mylar layer, and I've placed the painting face down. And now I'm going to tack this painting on the back of the stretcher. This is affectionately called a gallery wrap, or something that modern artists do to hide their tacks or staples, and there's nothing fundamentally wrong with it, it's just not the ideal way of stretching a painting. But in this case, I'm going to use it because I don't want to drive these tacks into this tacking edge. And you can see, no impasto lost. Precisely the point. Now, while I have the painting flat, I'm going to take this opportunity to cut out some of the strip lining material to create a window where we can see these inscriptions. I don't want to cover them up with the strip lining and make all of this extra work for naught. So tucking it in, making it tidy, making it look good, making it look deliberate. and there we go. I can continue on tacking the remaining tacking edges and folding them over, making everything look really nice, and then I can put the keys into this painting. The original keys were lost, so I've created new ones from some wood that I keep in the studio, and I'm going to drive them in with my hammer. The amount of pressure to put onto a painting is subjective, but it's something that I've kind of gotten a feel for over the many years that I've been doing this work. I like the painting to be taut, but not like a drum. I just want to make sure that there's no slack when the painting is moved. I don't want that canvas flopping around because that could put tension and stress on the paint layer. With those keys in place, I can now bind them with a little tack and some fishing line, thread through those holes that I drilled earlier. This is fundamentally to make sure that if these keys come out because of the movement of the wood over time, they don't get lost. I mean, we can make new ones, but really we don't want them sliding in between the canvas and the stretcher bar and creating a bulge on the face of the canvas. And now, the very ceremonial and super important application of the label to the back of the stretcher. And this will contain information about what I did for the next conservator. Before I go ahead and retouch this painting, I'm going to apply a varnish. But this time, I'm not going to brush it, I'm going to spray it. I don't want to put any stress on the painting surface with a brush, and I need a very light layer. I don't want it to pool in any of those nooks and crannies. And if I brush it on, that's probably what will happen. Now, luckily for me and the client, and maybe unluckily for you, the viewer, this painting does not require a tremendous amount of retouching. There are no catastrophic or major losses. But there are losses. We saw me filling them in earlier. And now I need to color match them so that those areas of white fill-in disappear. Now, there is no trick to retouching. It just takes a lot of practice and experience. And once you've done it for 10,000 hours, you're going to be pretty good at it. If it's your first time, you're going to be pretty bad at it. Not only because these paints don't react like oil paint or watercolor, they're a unique creation in and to themselves, but because sometimes what you see is not what actually needs to be put on the canvas. And what I mean by that is that it may be a combination of colors that achieves the desired effect. Maybe a little bit of blue where you didn't expect blue, or a little bit of red in green where it shouldn't be. The point is that color is interesting. It reacts to the surrounding colors. It reacts to the light in the environment. And so the way we see it maybe isn't the same on the canvas as on the palette. And so it just takes a lot of experience and a lot of playing around to modulate the color and to make sure that it's doing what you want it to do, hiding the damage. And with paintings like this, where there's just a lot of little spots, it just takes a lot of passes over and over again to make sure I'm catching all of those areas of loss. Some of them are big areas of fill-in, and some of them are just tiny little spots that didn't need fill-in, and so are a little bit harder to see. But once the fill-in is covered up and the retouching starts to make all of that damage go away, it's really amazing how our eye just kind of sees it as a complete piece of paint. We don't see it as an inlay or a fill-in or a patch or anything like that. It's really phenomenal how our brain can take little bits of data and combine them to make a complete picture, even where there are gaps. It's really kind of amazing. And with that, the retouching is complete. I said there wasn't a lot, and there wasn't. This painting wasn't about retouching. It wasn't about recreation or massive Herculean efforts to stabilize the piece. It was really about getting into the thick of it and finding unique solutions for these unique problems. And here's the painting, all complete and conserved. Because the retouching was so minor, it didn't need a final coat of varnish. I can add a resin to the retouching paints to make it shinier or more matte to match the varnish layer that I applied previously. And because the retouching paints are synthetic and UV stabilized, they aren't going to change with time like oil paints would. But the transformation was pretty spectacular. Yes, we knew it was going to be a colorful painting, but just how vibrant and full of life? Well, I don't think anybody really thought that it was going to be this electric. And the impasto really is what this piece is about. And so keeping that impasto preserved is critically important. And the little steps that I took to make sure that this impasto was safe, by treating the painting on the hot table with the felt and by not flipping it over during the strip lining process, was all for this moment, when we can see the painting and see the impasto catching the light, glittering on the surface of the canvas. Every single brushstroke, free and clear of grime and varnish, and resplendent in all of its colorful glory. And though all of the work that I did to get to this point, including all of that structural work and creative solutions, will probably never be seen by anybody but, a few of my closest friends, it matters, not just for me and the client, but for the artist as well. Though it took a slightly unconventional approach, the conservation was successful, and now, instead of being in it, we can enjoy the thick of it.